أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We are now fully in the month of Ramadan, and it seems to be going very, very quickly. Before we know it, we'll be looking forward to the last 10 days of Ramadan, the 27th night. And after that, we'll be reflecting upon how quickly this month of Ramadan has passed. Today, I just want to talk about three things, which is to do with the importance of mental health, briefly touch upon it, the importance of bodily health, and thirdly, I want to talk about what's called sociality, which is about community and well-being. And all these three things are all tied to the month of Ramadan, and they are also tied to fasting, and they are also tied to the broader message of the religion of Islam. So we know that fasting is an important obligation, as mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that is to do with taqwa, to have this awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But fasting also, our ulama and our doctors also tell us, has bodily benefits. It's a good way of detoxifying the endless stream of chemicals that we seem to be consuming. And you might be wondering what all of that is, but when you think about the takeaway that we eat every other week, and the drinks that we eat, and the fizzy pops that we have, all these chemicals that are constantly being poured forth into our body, one can only imagine the harm that this can lead to. And we see that we have an obesity epidemic in our country because we don't really move around as much as our ancestors perhaps did when they were looking after the farms. And most of us have jobs where we're not really moving too much, and this can have a negative impact on our health as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also in the Quran, He tells us to eat, but He also interestingly inserts a word in there in the Quran, halalan tayyiba. So it's not about just eating halal food, which all of us are interested in, of course, and when we look at shop windows, when we're walking, we look out for the halal side. But Allah is also making a deeper point, is that you eat good food, wholesome food, food that's actually beneficial for you. And in fact, if you want to extend the message in the Quran here, Allah is also telling us that the food that you source should be ethical. It should be from places that the animal itself that you're going to consume, whether it's a chicken or a lamb, has been treated well, has had a dignified existence. Unfortunately, in our mechanistic age, we don't really think about these things anymore. We just want to know it's halal. So we become legalistic. We just want to tick the box. We're no longer moral beings. We don't think about, well, this chicken that I'm eating, is it really tayyib? Is it really a type of chicken that I would grow or have in my garden and I would nurture? Probably not. And of course, I know there's economic consequences with that, but this is the type of Muslims that we should be, and we should demand that our food should be tayyib. We look at the halal and we're obsessed with halal, rightly so, but how many of us look at the food being tayyib, good food, wholesome food? So all of this is tied together because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran has also given us this responsibility of Khalif of this earth. We are responsible for maintaining the balance of this world, maintaining the natural balance that we have. And we see today there's a huge imbalance in society. And we can go on and talk about all of those consequences. So the first thing is to do with our physical health and our bodies ultimately, as against to what liberals would tell us that the body belongs to you. Our body does not belong to us. It belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a trust. ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. That eyesight that you have, that hearing that you have, the ability to taste and move, all of these things Allah will ask you on the day of Qiyamah how you use them. So the body is a gift. It's not something to be abused, to be cut off and chopped and changed. That's not what Islam teaches, right? So this is why liberals have a problem with us and we have a problem with them, because the body ultimately belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the creator of everything, and we should look after our body as a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That nicely brings me to my second point, which is about mental health and well-being. We know that depression has rocketed. We know that mental health issues have doubled in the last 10 years. We have a loneliness department. We have people who are struggling to make relationships, to talk to people, especially when we think about our older generation. My mother, just a few nights ago when we were having iftari, she was telling me about a family, a Muslim family, a local family, a local elderly gentleman who just wants someone to talk to, who just wants company, and he's willing to pay for it. My mom was telling me, he's willing to pay people for just someone to sit with him. I have a neighbor where I live, an elderly gentleman, he's not a Muslim, but it doesn't matter. And a few days ago, I just invited him to my house because his wife passed away a year ago. It was a very difficult moment in his life. She'd been ill for 18 months. He'd been looking after her. And I see him every day. And I just invite him to the house and we just have a conversation. Could be about anything. So we see that loneliness is also an issue in our community as Muslims. I know we emphasize a lot in our masajid about youth programs. And rightly so. But what about looking after our elders? They also have rights too. The ones who built our masajid, the ones who established our communities. Are we talking to them? Are we meeting them? Are we just giving them some food for iftar? Especially those who are lonely, those without a partner, those who are living on their own. So this is also an issue that's rising in our community. A few friends who are doctors have told me about this, and studies show this as well. So the second thing is about looking after one another, looking after our own mental health. We know that when we eat well, there's a relationship with eating well and feeling good. When you eat the right type of food, it releases the right type of chemicals, you feel better as well. So food is also related to mental health. Fasting is also related to mental well-being as well. When a person fasts, they have a heightened awareness of their weakness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when it gets to 5 o'clock, I'm sure you're all the same, you feel tired. Maybe you feel thirsty if you're addicted to coffee. You feel that weakness coming into you. And that weakness, that neediness, connects you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because becoming arrogant is what moves you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is embodied in the shaitan, who is shaitana, who is distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because for him it's all about the ego. Right? Asjudu liman khalaqta tina. What did he say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when Allah told him to make sajda to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam? Should I make sajda to this thing that's created from dust? He misunderstood the command because he was a materialist like people today. They only see the zahirul hayati dunya. They only see the external. They never saw the inner meaning. Because the inner meaning, as Imam Ghazali mentioned in his Kitab al-Hub, that the inner meaning was he wasn't making sajda to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. He was making sajda to the hukam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what was the hukam? Allah said, make sajda to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, like the malaika did, because they follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's also a deeper secret, which makes us special from animals. Right? Because we're not meant to graze like animals all the time. We're supposed to be intellectual beings, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also blew into Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, وَنُفِخَ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِهِ. You had a divine breath. The divine breath, which is a secret, blown into Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, which made him a superior being. Right? It's not your body that makes you special. It's this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ruh, which is eternal. And remember, my friends, that ruh is not from this world. I.e., when you get a magnifying glass, you won't be able to see it. Because the magnifying glass you're using is created in this world. It's a material being, material creation. You're observing something that can't be observed with that instrument. It's the wrong instrument you're using. That instrument doesn't even exist in this world. Can you see it? So when people say, Mawlana, where's this ruh? I can't show it to you because I don't have the tools to show it to you. Because the ruh is from the secret of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the ruh doesn't age. The ruh doesn't have a lifespan. The body has a lifespan, but the ruh doesn't. Because when you die, what happens to your ruh? Your ruh goes into the akhirah. Does your ruh die? No, your ruh doesn't die. Your ruh was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even before you came into this world. In the alami alastu bi rabbikum. Before you came into this world, you already had a ruh. You existed in ruh. But your body is what decays because it's depending on this world and the changes that happen in this world. So mental health is also another issue that we should always be aware of in this month of Ramadan. And fasting helps us to at least remove this anxiety that some of us have. But at the same time, we should be aware of our elders and our parents who might need company, visiting them, your grandparents if they're still alive. That's also an important form of ibadah as well. So we've talked about bodily health, we've talked about mental health. Fasting, incidentally and fascinatingly, is also tied to society. You'll be saying, Mawlana, how is fasting tied to society? When I fast, it's for myself. It's a huququllah, I fast. But isn't it true in the month of Ramadan that we talk to each other more, we're more social beings, we go for iftari to our parents' house, we share food, we sit together after Taraweeh, the brothers sit around in the masjid. There's a communal ethos in fasting as well, because we're all in the struggle together. This is beautiful in Islam. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to do something for His sake, He wants you to struggle, but He never wants you to struggle alone. Because when I see that my brothers are fasting, and they're going through difficulty, and they're all working, and they all want Mawlana Haroon to start at 1:30 so we can all get back to work, we're all in the struggle together. We're all together. I have to go back to work. I'm employed right now by my employers. So when I give my Jum'ah time, it's my lunch time. So I have to fulfill my rights. You have to fulfill your rights. We're all in this struggle together. That's one reason why I'm very strict with my timing, by the way, because I've worked and I know what it's like when people have to get back to work. So it's the adab is very, very important of this as well. So we're all in this struggle together in the month of fasting. I'm struggling, you're struggling. Just like in Hajj, when you go for Hajj, is it not the case that we all go for Hajj together? Everybody does it at the same time. No other country does it at a different time. Because when we see one another struggling, it gives you strength. Can you see? It gives you the strength in Islam. So in Islam, the strength lies in numbers. You see this in the salah. When you stand in sufuf, resembling the malaika. You know, one of the beautiful things about Islam is when you do ibadat, rituals, they are also connected to the other world. Because when you stand next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, like an army, it's like you're standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like the malaika in the highest heavens are standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they are not diverted from anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So fasting helps us in these three particular areas that I want to focus on. One is that it helps in our bodily sense. It keeps us healthy. Intermittent fasting, as they call it in modern day and age. Fasting is very, very important. It's also a way of protecting oneself from desires. And it's one way we can control our desires. Desires are things that we are meant to master, not let them master us. You're supposed to control your anger. You're supposed to control your anger, gain mastery of it. You're supposed to control your desires. And one of the ways you can see this is in the story of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, which I'll end with. In the story of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, it was recited just a few days ago. You'll notice one thing, that Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam was a slave. He was made into a slave, he was captured. But what liberated him? What liberated him? This is the question. What gave him freedom? Anybody know? What gave him ultimate freedom? He was enslaved, he was accused of many things. But what liberated him? When that desire was presented to him, a woman, a powerful woman, was presented before him, he could have fulfilled his desires. What did he do? He feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, he suffered consequences. But what was the end result of that? Allah made him, Ij'alni ala khaza'in. Allah gave him worldly dominion. Subhanallah. Can you see the connection? I bet you never thought about Surah Yusuf in that way. That he controlled his desires when it was presented before him. A beautiful woman was presented before him. He could have fulfilled his desires, but he didn't. He suffered consequences. He carried on, he persevered, remained patient. And Allah gave him freedom. Allah gave him his family back, his father back. Allah gave him everything back. Allah not only did that, Allah elevated his status. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this month of Ramadan to elevate our status with the qurbani that we make. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.